administration is behaving no differently from police states and authoritarian regimes across history. They've arrested a journalist for the crime of doing his job.
The First Amendment is designed to protect us from exactly that kind of government retaliation, from being targeted because those in power don't like our views. That's what the First Amendment means at its core.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Friday evening to you. I'm Del Walters here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day. From the arrest of journalist Don Lemon to the release of millions of new documents relating to disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. But first, let's take a look at some of today's other top stories.
A Kansas man is facing federal charges for allegedly threatening to kill Congresswoman Ilhan Omar on Facebook. 60-year-old Adam Lee Osborne of Wichita also threatened New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani last week. Osborne told federal agents the posts were his way of venting. The indictment comes after Omar was attacked with vinegar at a Minnesota town hall earlier this week. A judge ruled that accused killer Luigi Mangione should not face the death penalty if convicted. The 27-year-old is accused of shooting and killing the CEO of United Healthcare. That decision is a loss for federal prosecutors who were adamant about pursuing the death penalty in this case. Law enforcement seized several items from Mangione's backpack, including a handgun, a loaded magazine, and a red notebook, key pieces of evidence that authorities have said tie him to the killing. Mangione has pled not guilty. He still faces a maximum punishment of life in prison if convicted. A Minnesota man is charged with trying to break Luigi Mangione out of a Brooklyn jail by impersonating an FBI agent. 36-year-old Mark Anderson showed up at the detention center Wednesday with fake paperwork claiming to be a federal agent with a court order. When guards asked for his credentials, he provided his Minnesota driver's license and threw papers at officers. A search of his backpack found a barbecue fork and a steel blade. It's unclear if or how Anderson is connected to Mangione, who's awaiting trial for the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Longtime journalist Don Lemon spent the night in jail after being arrested by federal agents at the Grammy Awards. A second Minneapolis journalist was also arrested. Lemon was one of several journalists at an ICE protest at a church in St. Paul, Minnesota on January 18th. And according to his YouTube platform, Lemon was inside live streaming for hours. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen joins us now live from our D.C. newsroom. And Steph, what more do we know about this arrest?
Hey, Holly, good morning. Well, other than knowing that Lemon was arrested in Los Angeles and that he has spent the night in jail, the most other information we have right now actually comes from a statement from Lemon's attorney that was posted on a number of his social media platforms, where Lemon's attorney notes that this is an unprecedented attack on the First Amendment. His attorney says, in part, instead of investigating federal agents who killed two peaceful Minnesota protesters, the Trump Justice Department is devoting its time, attention, and resources to this arrest, and that is the real indictment of wrongdoing in this case. The statement says that this is just an attempt to distract from the many crises facing the Trump administration, and that they do plan to fight these charges vigorously in court. But it's worth noting it was in an exclusive interview with Scripps News before he was arrested that Lemon really spelled out exactly why he was there, and I want to listen to him explain for himself how he ended up inside this church along those protesters.
The only reason I ended up at that church is because I got to Minnesota so early because I wanted to go straight to the Whipple building and cover the protests and then leave. So I flew in, met the person who was leading the protest. She told me about what she was doing, didn't tell me where they were going. And I said, it's clandestine, I can't tell you, blah, blah, all that stuff. And so that whole thing, that's the reason why I ended up there, because I got there early.
Now, we know that a magistrate judge previously rejected an attempt to get an arrest warrant for Lemon, and it was in that same interview with Allison Camerata that Lemon said, even though he knew that the magistrate judge had already rejected charges against him once, that he still expected to be charged. He expected the DOJ to try to come after him in any way that they possibly can, viewing it as a potential win for the DOJ if they were able to arrest someone with the type of name recognition that Don Lemon really has. So as far as we know, we believe he is still in custody in jail right now, but we're hoping that we hear more either from him directly or from the Department of Justice as the day progresses here, Holly.
And yeah, and interestingly enough, too, also a federal appeals court denied that arrest warrant after also the DOJ said no. I mean, I'm sorry, the magistrate court said no, you don't have enough evidence here. So knowing all of that, have we heard anything from the DOJ about the arrest since yesterday?
We did hear a brief bit via social media, of course, from the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, where she says it was at her direction that Lemon and 3 others were arrested. Among those other 3 arrested were that other independent journalist, Georgia Fort, that you mentioned earlier, Holly. There was also a former Democratic politician among those arrested that has run for a couple different political offices in Minnesota. We've also heard a bit from the White House, making light almost of this arrest of Lemon in the White House, posting up a picture saying, quote, "When life gives you lemons," and then saying that Don Lemon was arrested for involvement in the St. Paul Church riots, really touting that arrest. We know at least 3 other people were already arrested for their involvement in this church, including the alleged organizer. Now, what we know about their charges is they were charged under what's called the FACE Act, which is a federal law that ensures that access to either a reproductive health care clinic, access to a church, that is not blocked or interfered with. So that's the law that we know previously has been used to arrest some of these church protesters. But again, it's still unclear what exactly Lemon was arrested for. We don't know whether it was just an arrest warrant that was issued or if maybe it went through a grand jury and he was indicted. We still have a lot of questions there. We've reached out to the Department of Justice in a couple different ways and are just waiting to hear back, Holly.
Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen live for us. Thank you for that update, Steph.
Straight ahead on Today As It Happened.
In the whole country, I would say that this was the perfect candidate. This was not a surprise or anything. This was the man that's most qualified.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories.
President Trump will name Kevin Warsh as the new Federal Reserve Chair today after meeting with the former Fed governor at the White House. The president made the announcement earlier this morning on Truth Social, saying Warsh was, quote, out of central casting. All right, our financial contributor, Danny Moses, who also hosts his own show right here on our network, The Danny Moses Show, every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, joins us. So, Danny, with Warsh's experience as a Fed governor, he's had a strong stance at times against inflation. Do you think this is going to ease concerns about the Fed not being independent?
I think a little bit. And I think when he comes into his term, which doesn't begin until June, there's only 2.5 years left in this administration. So I think the belief is that he will remain independent. The odds of a rate cut did not change at all. And some people feared that he might be deemed a little more hawkish, wouldn't be market friendly. But over the last year, he's made it clear that he thinks that rates should be lower. And your point you made, he served as a governor on the Fed during the great financial crisis. So he has the experience there. He worked at Morgan Stanley for years. He's got the Wall Street experience. And he's also a big believer in deregulation, which he thinks helps the markets and actually decreases inflation. So I think it's kind of a non-event as far as the bond market's concerned. Gold and silver took a little bit of a hit because the dollar strengthened a little bit on it. So I think the belief is that he'll watch inflation carefully and not try to make a mistake here on policy.
Yeah, and it seems that financial markets seem to view him as someone who wouldn't always follow the president's direction and maintain credibility for monetary policy. So is he likely to push for lower rates in the short term as Trump wants? And what do you think the long view will be?
Again, there's a few months here before he takes control, and the odds are 66% that the Fed cuts rates in their June meeting, which is what it was prior to him being announced. So I would lean towards a rate cut at some point before then. Certainly if the economy slows, it might even happen under Powell. So we'll see. He will take an active role once he's confirmed to replace Stephen Myron on the board now, which his term's supposed to end tomorrow. So we'll see when that happens. So he'll have a vote already at the upcoming meetings prior to June. So again, I think the one takeaway is this quantitative easing of printing money and all those things. I think that's kind of been put to the side a little bit, and that's a relief as far as inflation people that are hawks out there that fear that that would hurt the bond market. And again, the bond market is not moving today. So 10-year yields are relatively flat. And I think this is the best case scenario as far as the markets are concerned.
And so after hearing the news, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney posted on X, I think we have it, he said Kevin Warsh is a fantastic choice to lead the world's most important central bank at this crucial time. So do you think that this pick enhances the institution's credibility with global central banks?
Yes, I think for sure. I think the belief is, as you said at the outset, that it'll remain somewhat independent, hopefully fully independent going forward. So I think people around the world are happy to see that. And again, global central banks all need to kind of work together. There's a lot of debt in the system and a lot of liquidity still out there. So I think it's very important that this message is sent the right way.
What do you think the long-term economic trends could be shaped by this Fed chair's tenure in the long run?
It's all about inflation expectations. It can become self-fulfilling in the markets. That's actually what drives markets. So if inflation expectations come down as a result of having someone running the Fed that might look out and actually raise rates if they're fear of inflation, I think it's a positive in the longer term. So I think it can help the economy and the consumer in the long term. You might not get all the rate cuts that you want near term. They can boost productivity, but over the long term, I think it's a healthier choice.
You mentioned consumers, so let's bring it down to the micro level. What does it mean? What does this decision mean for consumers and even small businesses?
Nothing's really changed overnight. Again, I think it'll be data dependent. A lot of news out there about K-shaped economy keeps getting stretched. The wealthiest people in the United States are controlling the majority of the economy and experience the benefits of the stock market, while the lower part of the K is not. I don't think that changes right now. If anything, I think rates being expected to where they were going to be is a non-event. But again, longer term, if you can anchor inflation expectations, that's a positive for all consumers, even if it means higher rates in the short term.
Danny Moses, Scripps News financial contributor, thanks so much for your thoughts on this today.
This was the man that's most qualified. Top student, best schools, everything was like perfect. Youngest person ever to serve on the Fed. Got the whole package. Looks don't mean anything, but he's got the look.
President Trump's approval rating is slipping amid a long list of issues, including the Minnesota unrest, Epstein files, and a potential government shutdown. So let's bring in Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty live for us now. And Andrew, you've been looking at these new polls. What are you learning from them?
Yeah, well, Holly, it's really interesting, I think, going back to what we just heard from the president moments ago, talking about his new pick for the head of the Federal Reserve, because I think that is one instance of sort of the black cloud that has been hanging over the White House for much of 2026. We knew that those images, as you mentioned, out of Minnesota were holding the president back in terms of his approval on the issue of immigration, one of the key things that he ran on in 2024. We knew that Americans were not feeling that life had been more affordable. The cost of goods, groceries, gas, everything still pinching American pocketbooks, even in this now 1 year into President Trump's second term. But the thing that has kind of stuck out to me in some of the most recent polling is about just his overall character and fitness for office among Republicans. So often we talk about that MAGA base that sticks with the president thick and thin. Well, there's not necessarily evidence that is fraying, but Republicans overall. I want to look at what we got on the screen right now. This is President Trump acts ethically. Again, this is asked among Republicans. Back about 1 year ago, it was a majority of Republicans, 55%, now down to just 42%. Similar question that he respects democratic values, that is small d democratic values, the values that this country was founded on. A year ago, 60%. We've seen some slippage there, down 8% to 52%. Again, among members of the GOP. Into that question that I was just talking about, mental fitness, well, that was a Pew Research survey. It also showed that it was about 3/4 of Republicans about a year ago said, of course, the president is mentally fit for office, 75%. That is down to 66%, and it's just 32% overall. And I think that, there's a lot of what about isms going on, especially among Democrats right now. This idea that Joe Biden was criticized heavily for some mental gaffes, some slip-ups, some screw-ups when he was in office, and that same standard is not applied to President Donald Trump. Well, now we see some of that breaking through, at least with the public overall. It is worth noting, I talked about that Pew Research, that's about an 8,000 person survey, much larger than most of the other surveys, but it does line up overall with what we're seeing across the board around that 1 year mark, January 20th, 1 year since the inauguration. This specific poll had his approval down to about 37%. Most of them have it in the low 40s, but that, Holly, is why looking forward is so important. Just about 1 month from now, we are going to hear that State of the Union. That is going to be the president's next best chance to sort of turn the tide. And of course, it comes with the context of about a shifting message in immigration with Tom Homan in Minnesota and so many other sort of subtle hints that the president and those around him are trying to pivot ahead of that major address that we expect him to give in front of the Joint Session of Congress.
All right, Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty, thanks so much, Raph.
Just ahead on Today as It Happened.
Grab my keys and my phone! Get my stuff!
Thanks for staying with us on Today as It Happened. I'm Del Walters with your daily look at the day's biggest stories. Demonstrators taking to the streets to protest ICE deployment in Minneapolis. Katia Tubman has been on the ground there all week long for us. And Katia, what is planned for today?
Well, a lot, Del, and just moments ago, a lot just occurred. We were stepping out of the vehicle, just getting ready to talk to you here. We're at the federal building, Whipple here, the home base for immigration proceedings in Minneapolis, when FBI agents detained a protester who told us his name was Ian Austin, that he is an Army veteran. He had gotten into a confrontation with these agents who then all surrounded him right next to us and pulled him into their vehicle. He was able to throw his phone and keys, shouting for protesters nearby to help him out and to collect his information as well as his lawyer's information. That is just one of the tense moments we have seen on the ground here outside of the federal building, Whipple building. There are protesters still out here. They've been out here since early this morning. Hundreds of them showed up, chanting that they want ICE out, regardless of what Trump officials have said about drawing back forces on the ground. And they said they're going to stay here until ICE is out, Del. And among these protesters are not just people here in Minneapolis, but across the country, as a national protest will be taking place called the National Shutdown, meaning no work, no school, no shopping. And so a lot of businesses here are closing their doors or offering free services. And a lot of people are showing up to these protests. This is not going to be the only one happening here in Minneapolis today, and definitely not the only one happening here in the country. So with that going on, we've also seen clergy members that we've been talking throughout the week show up here as well, as many of them came in hundreds to Minneapolis, showing that they want to spread the message of Minneapolis. People here are their neighbors and they have their back and they're showing up for them.
You can't stop us from loving our neighbors.
In a city on edge, neighbors are looking out for one another.
Never give up and never surrender.
Loving your neighbor means showing up.
Faith leaders from across the country are doing just that.
I've seen a meme floating around that said, oh, if your pastor is going to protest, they're an activist, not a pastor. And I said, if your pastor is not going to protest, you don't have a real pastor.
It is imperative. We see that horrible things happen, we have to respond.
The greatest form of darkness is the inability to see one another. It's not only the faith leaders that I think have brought the light, but ordinary Minnesotans that are reaching out in care for their neighbors.
Rabbi Alexander Davis and Reverend T. Michael Rock have congregations in Minneapolis. Reverend Caroline Bright traveled here from Vermont.
It truly has been a privilege to be able to be here. The resilience that I've been able to bear witness to, the truth of what's happening here on the ground is devastating and it's beautiful.
They're each among hundreds of clergy members who answered a call from March, a Minnesota multi-faith group committed to community healing, fighting for justice.
In this call to have all these clergy come into town was to answer the question, what can I do for you? But also, something's happening here that we want to share with the world as well.
What made you answer the call to show up the way you have, especially around such horrific events in Minneapolis?
The pain that's being experienced is all pervasive in all corners of the community. So you can't help as a clergy but want to both be a pastoral support and raise your voice for justice in this time.
People of faith have an obligation to step up and speak up when there are things that are happening that are not ethical and that are immoral. And when the call went out to clergy, I knew immediately that I needed to show up because I could.
From different faiths, but with a common mission of keeping faith alive.
What are your hopes for not just Minnesota or Minneapolis, but I guess the country at this point?
So my hopes for the next few days are that ICE will leave Minnesota.
And that people will be able to rebuild their lives and reunite their families.
We know this fight, and we're in it for the long haul. This is not a temporary thing to love our neighbors. This is a commandment, and so we're following that sense of who we are as a community.
You can't stop us from loving our neighbor.
Coming up on Today, as it happened.
What we want to see in Venezuela is a country that no longer harbors hostile actors towards the United States, is no longer a safe haven for narco-terrorists, ensures that the fundamental freedoms of its citizens are respected.
Welcome back to Today, as it happened. Scripps News end of the day snapshot of our biggest stories. Let's pick up where we left off. This week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was on Capitol Hill answering some tough questions about the recent actions by this country in Venezuela. Rubio telling senators that the U.S. has no imminent plans to take further military action against that nation, then pushing back against Senator Rand Paul, who asked, was this an act of war? Take a listen.
If a foreign country bombed our air defense missiles, captured and removed our president, and blockaded our country, would that be considered an act of war?
Well, I think your question is about and I will acknowledge you've been very consistent on all these points the entire career. So let me, no matter who's in charge. So I will point to two things. The first is it's hard for us to conceive that an operation that lasted about 4.5 hours and was a law enforcement operation to capture someone we don't recognize as a head of state, indicted in the United States, wanted with a $50 million bounty.
My question would be, if it only took 4 hours to take our president, it's very short, nobody dies on the other side, nobody dies on our side, it's perfect. Would it be an act of war?
We just don't believe that this operation comes anywhere close to the constitutional definition of war.
But would it be?
Let's just say they agreed to disagree. State Department spokesman Mignon Houston joins us now. Mignon, thanks for being with us. So what are the next steps with Venezuela?
Well, it's an excellent question, and the Secretary this week was quite clear about the next steps. What we want to see in Venezuela is a country that no longer harbors hostile actors towards the United States, is no longer a safe haven for narco-terrorists, ensures that the fundamental freedoms of its citizens are respected. And so the Secretary laid out a three-pronged approach, starting really with stability, ensuring that when the vacuum of leadership from Maduro being captured was gone, that it did not create chaos or instability that would harm not only Venezuelans, but our hemisphere writ large. Next, moving into recovery. Recovery phase being one that ensures the oil revenues from these sanctioned oils are benefiting the Venezuelan people, which they have not been for some time. And third, looking at a transition. And that transition would include free and fair elections up to the will of the Venezuelan people. And so this is the approach we're looking at. It's one that is prudent, is strategic, ensuring that we are seeing greater stability. We want to see greater cooperation, and that's based on the strong leadership of this administration.
Mignon, can you clear up an area of curiosity? What was this really about? At first, we were told it was about drugs. And then we were told it was about regime change. Then we were told it was about oil. What was it really about? Why are we now operating in Venezuela?
Well, the president and the secretary has actually spoken about this on a number of occasions. And really the root of this came down to the fact that we had a individual, Maduro, who was in Venezuela. He was allowing conditions that were really threatening the United States. He's indicted in New York on charges of criminality and narco-terrorism bringing in drugs, poison across our hemisphere, across our border, hindering U.S. citizens. And so this really was a very limited in scope, focused counter-drug operation to ensure that Maduro was removed, that he faces the charges, his wife also facing these charges. We have the hemisphere breathing a collective sigh of relief, knowing that this individual who was spreading poison across our hemisphere is no longer there to cause this additional harm. And this is based on the leadership of this administration. It really is a win for our hemisphere, and we'll look forward to next steps with the interim authorities.
But you realize one of the areas of confusion is the fact that a narco-terrorist was actually released from prison who bought tons of cocaine into the country, but we'll leave that on the table for now. Let's talk about this oil. Venezuelan oil, the money is sitting in an account in Qatar. Explain to our audience why that money isn't sitting in U.S. Treasury accounts.
Well, absolutely. And first, to go back to your last point, I think the president was quite clear on the Honduran president, if that's who you're speaking about, and the decision to pardon him that's been out there publicly and why he made that decision. As it relates to the oil, this is an important aspect of this policy, that the oil revenues from this sanctioned quarantine oil, they really were not benefiting the Venezuelan people. The Venezuelan people were suffering. They were being denied basic fundamental human rights and access to needs that were important for their livelihoods. This opportunity right now is a new dawn for Venezuela. It's an opportunity for the interim authorities to use.
Why is the money in Qatar?
Well, the secretary spoke to this, and what he said was this is an agreement based on what the interim authorities have actually said, that they agreed to, that the money, all of the money, Venezuelan oil money, belongs to Venezuela. What we are essentially doing, this money in Qatar was agreed upon by Venezuela, and we're essentially using it in a very swift manner to make sure that it's not going to be misused by creditors, by other malign actors, that it will get back to the Venezuelan people. And so that's the focus right now. It's part of this phased approach, focusing on stability. The secretary spoke to this. It really is American leadership helping to support strategic direction for Venezuela.
Minion, can you talk to us about Canada? The president decertifying Canadian-made planes. This is Canada, which is supposed to be our friendly neighbor to the north. We swap baseball teams and hockey teams. Why Canada?
Well, look, the president has had multiple conversations publicly. We are, of course, friends. We are long-term partners and friends and neighbors with Canada. We want to see Canada in a relationship that grows. We want to see a relationship with Canada that continues to be prosperous and secure and stable for our citizens, not only in Canada, but in the United States. And so I'll let the president's remarks speak for themselves as it relates to those operations. But diplomatically speaking, what we are working on here at the State Department is to ensure our hemisphere is in the best possible place, well positioned to take on any emerging threats for the 21st century.
Minion, I don't want to let you go, though, before we talk about this. The former head of FIFA has been overheard saying that people should boycott the World Cup because of Donald Trump's immigration tactics. I want you to respond to that.
Well, look, this World Cup is going to be one of the most incredible sporting events of all time. We have 3 countries working together for the first time to be host. We have more games in this tournament than ever before in a World Cup. And the president himself, through his decisive leadership, has made it even more easy for individuals who have legitimate tickets to come to the World Cup to get an appointment for their visas so they can make sure they're here in time for these games. He's making sure that it is more efficient, more effective, but also focusing on expanded vetting to ensure that individuals who are coming into the United States understand that a visa is a privilege, not a right, that every visa decision is a national security decision, giving American citizens and those who come to the United States a sense of ease, knowing that we are going to protect U.S. national security, ensure the games are safe, and hopefully everyone will really enjoy what will be promised as the most unprecedented, most magical soccer event of all time.
State Department Deputy Spokesperson Mignon Houston. Mignon, thanks for being with us. Straight ahead on Today As It Happened.
There's this built-in assumption that somehow there's this hidden tranche of information of men that we know about that we're covering up or that we're choosing not to prosecute. That is not the case. I don't know whether there are men out there that abuse these women. If we learn about information and evidence that allows us to prosecute them, you better believe we will.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Del Walters. Let's jump right into our rundown of today's top stories. The Justice Department today releasing 3 million pages and thousands of images and videos in relation to the Jeffrey Epstein case. These documents and media were earlier withheld from the initial release in December. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller is live in New York City right now. Alex, you have been pouring through today's release. The way I timed it out, you will be doing this for the next 10 years. What notable things, though, have stood out to you so far?
I mean, 3.5 million pages of information to go through here. There's really just a lot to decipher. But what we have seen so far is that a lot of these pages, these documents are duplicates. They're court documents that we've seen, emails back and forth that we have seen, records that are not necessarily new, and frankly, many of them have been public record for quite some time. But there are a number of allegations in here. I want to talk to you first about an allegation that was made by a special inspector against Jeffrey Epstein that talks about them being on a tarmac and seeing Epstein with young girls. In here it says that the first instance was 2 girls who appeared to be 11 and 12 years old with white skin, and then another time it says a girl looked to be 16, maybe 17 or 18, appeared to be of mixed race. This was all, in the year essentially leading up to Epstein's arrest. So this is one of the more recent allegations that we have seen. But there are also other allegations. Look, there's a lot of people who are looking for names here. And there are some uncorroborated reports that we are seeing. We're not going to put them up on the screen for you, but they allege misconduct by both President Trump and by former President Bill Clinton. And in those, this chart alleges a number of actions there. It's a complaint record that has been put forward by a task force, by the Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force. But what it doesn't say is whether any of the allegations were corroborated, whether they were fully investigated, and that's why we're not putting them up there for you. But there is one email that we are looking at right now that is an email from Jeffrey Epstein to a lawyer that is appears to be one of his close personal friends who had worked in the Obama administration. And in that, there is an allegation that Epstein makes himself that says that supposedly there was a girl that President Trump, then a private citizen, had sex with at his house when she's underage, that this girl had said that she was a witness. So again, these are emails from Epstein that make these kinds of allegations, or is at least relaying an allegation, but there is no context around it. Just like the previous 2 document dumps, Del, that we have seen, there's no context. The documents are not in order, and it's really difficult to decipher exactly what the message is that is trying to get across. So it's difficult to tell exactly in some of these documents who wrote them. This one we do know, and where they fit in the timeline here.
Alex, also notable today that the Justice Department news conference was run by Todd Blanche, not the AG Pam Bondi. Why?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that Bondi has been facing some tough scrutiny for the way that she has handled this and other issues while serving as the Attorney General. And it is notable that Blanche was the one to take the podium today. I want to play you a little bit of what he said, and I want to talk to you about a conversation I had with a survivor on the other end.
There's this built-in assumption that somehow there's this hidden tranche of information of men that we know about that we're covering up or that we're choosing not to prosecute. That is not the case. I don't know whether there are men out there that abuse these women. If we learn about information and evidence that allows us to prosecute them, you better believe we will. But I don't think that the public or you all are going to uncover men within the Epstein files that abuse women, unfortunately.
And I was talking to a survivor specifically about that last sentence he said about
unfortunately, that men are not going to be revealed likely. And essentially what this survivor told me, Del, is that this is a nail in the coffin. They don't believe that they're going to get those names. They call it a shame. They say they're frustrated by these document dumps that aren't producing what they want to see, which is the names of their alleged abusers. And they say that they're frustrated that Bondi was not the one up there at the podium, and that they find Blanche to be untrustworthy in the way that he spoke earlier today, and that they believe that the focus right now for him and the department as a whole is on the abusers and not on the victims. Now, while we were combing through these documents, we came across a set of emails from March 31st of 2025, where it appears that the FBI field office in New York says that they have completely reviewed all of the material that's in their possession. 100%, they say, review completion. So it begs the question, what is taking so long to get all this information out? Obviously, the FBI field office in New York is not the only office here, but it appears as though some of this work has been done nearly a year ago. And the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, Robert Garcia, responding to all of this today, saying that they're demanding the names of the co-conspirators, he says, and the men and pedophiles who abused women and girls, and that they will begin a review of this latest limited production. But let's be clear, our work and investigation are just getting started, Del. Obviously, 3.5 million pages of documents, is a lot to go through, but it still might end up being just a drop in the bucket for what the Department of Justice really holds.
And we always have to go back to the original point, which is these are grown men who are engaged in sexual activities with young girls. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller for us live in New York. We'll check back in with you as you continue to pour through these documents. Coming up on Today, as it happened.
We've seen the administration very aggressively go after critics, go after folks who are dissenting, go after folks who are reporting the news. That's of deep concern, and it should be of deep concern to all Americans.
You're watching Today as it happened. Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. Let's dive right back in. President Trump condemning Alex Preddy, calling him crazed and out of control. It follows new videos that show Preddy in a confrontation with federal immigration officers more than a week before being shot and killed. Preddy can be seen wrestled to the ground by agents after kicking out the taillight of a vehicle back on January 13th. The president calling Preddy an agitator and perhaps an insurrectionist in a post on Truth Social earlier today. Former CNN anchor Don Lemon facing charges of federal civil rights crimes, charges stemming from this protest at a Minnesota church earlier this month. He was arrested last night in Los Angeles where he was covering the Grammy Awards. The charges relate to a January 18th demonstration at St. Paul Church where protesters interrupted the service and chanted "ICE out." The church's pastor is an immigrations and customs enforcement official. Now, Lemon's arrest is the latest incident in what critics are calling an attack on press freedoms. Months ago, the president banning the Associated Press from White House briefings because they refused to refer to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. Earlier this month, the FBI raiding the home of a Washington Post reporter who did stories on Trump. They seized her cell phone and her computers, but a judge ruled the government could not legally access any of those items. Scripps News legal affairs correspondent Avajoy Burnett is live in our D.C. newsroom. And Avajoy, journalists have First Amendment protections. Does that apply to Don Lemon and at least the other journalists who were arrested?
Just at face value, Del, yes, that does apply to Don Lemon and the other independent journalist who was arrested in the last 24 hours. Remember, Don Lemon and that other journalist, they went into that church in Minnesota, and according to both of them, they were following protesters who were going inside the church to exercise their First Amendment rights. If you look at the video from Don Lemon that was streamed online, he repeatedly said, "I am a journalist. I'm here covering this event. I'm not a part of what's going on." And we also know that the other journalist as well, her name is Georgia Fort, she said the same thing. I was able to speak with legal experts about this because remember, historically, journalists are the ones who go there so that we're able to see and know what's happening, not just in spaces like this, but even in war zones. And one person is a journalism ethics professor. The other is a First Amendment right attorney. And they said as long as journalists aren't participating in these events, they are not organizing the events, Dell, they do have those freedoms, those First Amendment freedoms that are extended to them. So, of course, this is something that so many people are really concerned about, including the National Association of Black Journalists, because they believe the rights of these journalists, even though they are independent journalists, is being violated, Dell.
Eva Joy, are there instances where journalists can lose their First Amendment protection?
There are absolutely instances where someone could lose their protection. If you break the law and you are outside of that particular protection, you could end up in a bad position, according to legal experts. And one example that they gave to me is if you are going into a space that is a private space and you've been asked to leave and you continue to remain in that space, you could be charged with trespassing, for example. But we have to see all of the details that are coming out or that will eventually come out of this particular case. Remember that at least one judge previously did not move forward with an indictment against Don Lemon because they believe there wasn't enough evidence to prove that he did something wrong here. But those are instances. For example, if you go into a space where you're not welcomed and you repeatedly refuse to leave, that could be one instance where you could lose that First Amendment protection, Dell.
Eva Joy, before I let you go, concerns by press institutions as a whole that the First Amendment, free press, is under attack.
Absolutely, and we have seen many instances. You mentioned a few of them. For example, the lawsuit that the Associated Press had against the White House, journalists at the Pentagon, for example, not getting the usual access that they would unless they signed a certain document. And then we also know that universities, for instance, have had to put up legal battles against the administration, and law firms as well. That First Amendment attorney who I spoke with, he said, this is really an issue. Even if you're not someone who is in those spaces, this affects everyone. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We've seen the administration very aggressively go after critics, go after folks who are dissenting, go after folks who are reporting the news. That's of deep concern, and it should be of deep concern to all Americans. The First Amendment is designed to protect us from exactly that kind of government retaliation, from being targeted because those in power don't like our views. That's what the First Amendment means at its core. And what I'm worried about is an erosion of trust in the First Amendment because the administration's actions have continued unabated.
And we do know that the White House posted about this earlier today regarding Don Lemon, also the Attorney General as well. This is something that legal experts are also watching because what is said by the administration could potentially ruin their case once this goes to court if it moves forward. The expert who we just heard from there, he said, even if this case is ultimately tossed out, the process could potentially be the punishment here. You may have someone like a Don Lemon who has a really high-profile attorney, but when you look at other journalists, this could serve as a kind of chilling effect where someone may think twice about covering a protest if they believe they could somehow be arrested in the future, and they may not have the resources, the money, in order to hire really high-profile attorney, Dell.
Yeah, anybody in Washington can tell you that lawyers are not cheap. Scripps News Legal Affairs correspondent Eva Joy Burnett for us live in D.C. Eva Joy, thank you very much. Thank you for spending some of your evening with us on Today As It Happened. I'm Del Walters. Have a good Friday night and an excellent weekend.